Good morning, and welcome to LLT 121 Classical Mythology. In my haste to conclude our last episode of Classical Mythology, I regret that I did not give you the opportunity to ask any questions about the concept of anthropomorphism versus animism. Do you have any questions about the basic concept of anthropomorphism versus animism? Okay, then you should have no trouble understanding, or here's a hint, describing on an essay exam the procedure from animism. There is a god of the ocean. His name is Ocean. He's made out of water. He's blue and flows all over the place. That's called... Way to go. The progression from that to a sea god who sits behind his desk in his office at the bottom of the ocean, complete with pictures of his kids on the wall, named Poseidon. I'm just making that part up about the pictures of kids on the wall and stuff. That just kind of gave me something to do while you were taking your quiz. But notice that Poseidon always has a big, huge, scraggly beard that just flows down in waves. You never see a sea god with a trim little goatee or something like that. And that in itself is a testimony to the animistic conceptions of deity. That is to say, he may be anthropomorphic as all get out. He may, have a wife that he messes around on, just like all the other Greek men seem to sometimes. But that beard and that trident give it away. That he is still, despite the heights to which he is raised, he is still a sea god. From semester to semester, I use the sea gods as my choice of essay topic for your discussion of the transition from animism to anthropomorphism. There are others, but this one's the most fun, I guess, because in the beginning, obviously, you have this huge force of nature. If you've ever watched the surf take apart a sandcastle or a house or a road or something like that, ever watch a river in flood carry away a pickup truck or a cow, you realize that water is very powerful. If you've ever watched the little trickle of water in your ditch rise up and swallow the road, you could also attribute to water a fickle mind. It's up, it's down. You could say water is tricky. It's always twisting and turning and finding the path of least resistance. You could say that water is devious. And we're going to find out that your basic sea god or water god is all of these things. But let's start out with the animistic end of the sea gods. By the way, we don't have a whole lot of really good myths about sea gods. There's really nothing profound about the sea gods. There are lots of profound things about Aphrodite, goddess of love. I'll have lots of profound comments about her. And there will be plenty of profound comments about the gods of the afterlife and what happens to you after you die. You can mine some profundity out of that, but the sea gods are basically just like, I know. Well, don't start yawning until I start telling you about the sea gods. It's like calling roll. In the beginning, Gaia gave birth to a number of gods, one of whom was Pontus, the ocean. Because the gene pool was so very limited at this time, she had to marry her own son. And their kids were a bunch of sea monsters. Now, I know it's hard to resist the joke about inbreeding. Of course, if a mother marries her son, they are going to have monsters. They had a bunch of kids, one of whom's name was Thaumas. Thaumas isn't that important. His kids are more important than he is. Thaumas sounds like a name that somebody might actually have. But Thaumas in ancient Greek means monster. Phorcys is another god whose name means something I don't even remember. His sister / wife is Ceto, C-E-T-O, whose name in ancient Greek means sea monster. We get our term cetacean studies, okay, from the Greek word C-E-T-O, which means sea monster. Nereus was another son of Gaia and Pontus, and he's your basic old man of the sea type. Wise, big bushy beard, can change shapes into anything he wants, knows a lot of interesting things. Okay. The children of, Nereus is actually married to somebody. This is the first time, I believe, in this class that we have a mythological character with a name somebody might actually have. Many of us know people named Doris. Some of you might even be named Doris. I think that's neat. The name means gift. It's a name that people still actually have to this day, as opposed to Phorcys and Thetis. Working our way over from the left hand of the board, we see that Electra and Thaumas had a daughter named Iris, who is the rainbow. Okay. Iris is the ancient Greek word for rainbow. Iris becomes conceived of as an anthropomorphic goddess, a very beautiful one, because the rainbow is beautiful. And Iris is traditionally assigned as the messenger of Hera. Okay, and it's kind of nice. The rainbow is conceived of as a bridge between heaven and earth, etc. That's the goddess Iris running messages up to Hera, who Zeus is cheating on her with now. The Harpies are a bunch of evil sisters with the heads of women, with the head of a woman, and the body of a bird. And they fly around, breaking up picnics and stuff like that. Their modus operandi, their method of operation is they swoop down on the tables because they're birds, and they eat whatever they can, and whatever it is that they can't eat, they befoul fecally, if you know what I mean. They poop on it. And that is the deal with the Harpies. We'll see them later in the award-winning myth, Jason and the Argonauts. Okay? Moving right over to marriage number 2, Phorcys and Ceto. They have, Ladon, the guy over here on the right, he's a dragon. Okay, we're not going to do much with him. He's just basically a dragon. He lives, I think, out at the end of the world, guarding the apples of the Hesperides. His sisters come in packs. One pack of 3 sisters is known as the Graii, the 3 goddesses of old age. Their name in ancient Greek means the gray-haired ones. The 3 gray-haired goddesses of old age. They share one eye and one tooth, which they take turns using it, and they are extremely beautiful. Are you suggesting an old gray-haired person with one eye and one tooth cannot be beautiful? I am very, very beautiful. The Gorgons, their 3 sisters, live out at the edge of the world, and one of them you probably know quite well as Medusa. Medusa was ugly. Medusa had snakes for hair. Medusa was so ugly. There's some hope for you people. Medusa was so ugly.
How ugly was
You'd never tell these people are on camera. That one look at her face would turn you to stone. Okay? For those of you who watched that award-winning movie, Clash of the Titans, you know the drill. Medusa is the original five-bagger. Okay? Rumor has, well, it's not rumor. Hesiod believed it was a fact. She used to be very beautiful until one day Poseidon's wife caught her messing around with Poseidon and threw her into a blend, a boiling pot with a magic mix of 12 special herbs and spices that made her that ugly. Okay, we'll meet them later. Nereus and Doris are the third couple of sea gods that we are going to talk about. They produce 50 daughters known as the Nereids, which is ancient Greek for daughters of Nereus. Okay, way to go. I'm going to tell you about Amphitrite, Galatea, and Thetis, and I'm not going to tell you about the 47 others, but they're there. Keep in mind, it takes a lot of sea deities to populate the ocean and the rivers and the streams and the seas and the bays in an animistic viewpoint of the world. I am convinced that certain intersections in Springfield, Missouri have their own deities who are very evil to humans. And you might think, too, that, Doris is pretty heroic herself, giving birth to 50 kids. But by sea goddess standards, this is chump change. Gaia mingles in love with Uranus, one of their kids, is the Titan Oceanus, who mingles in love with his sister Tethys. And Oceanus and Tethys have 1 million daughters known as the Oceanids, to which my only response is, ouch. Okay? We can sit around and chuckle at it all we want, but if you will try to put yourselves for a second in the mindset of the ancient Greeks, if you have ever been out at sea or, out on open water when the water started getting rough, perhaps your tiny ship got tossed, it's not all that hard to think that there is some deity in there doing this to you. And maybe you could win them over so you can hit ground on the shore of some uncharted desert isle. Nereus and Doris's kids are as follows. Thetis. We've met Thetis before. The promising young sea nymph, the goddess, if you will, who is destined to bear a child greater than his father. This is the promising young sea nymph whose identity Zeus was so desperate to find out, so he could avoid sleeping with her while he was busy sleeping with all the other women and goddesses he could lure into bed. And she eventually married this guy by the name of Peleus. We'll meet them later. Amphitrite is the long-suffering Mrs. Poseidon. Keep in mind that Nereus and Doris had 50 kids. Oceanus and Tethys had 1 million kids. Okay, I've suggested that it's pretty heroic for a goddess to give birth to 50 daughters, and it certainly is, but you have to admit that Nereus, is a pretty studly fellow himself. we get back to the question we first addressed way back when we were talking about the birth of the universe from chaos. If you're seeing the world in terms of sex, creation of the world in terms of sex, you've got to have that love drive to keep reproducing. Is that right, Mitch?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I like to hear. And when we're talking about animistic gods at the beginning of time and animistic goddesses at the beginning of time, you know, it's no big deal. They're animistic. We don't have to hold them to human standards of behavior. But here's Poseidon, the sea god. Sea gods are notoriously studly. Sea goddesses are notoriously fertile. Guess what? He's got the same approach to marriage that his brother Zeus has, which is to say the wife stays home and I get out there and play. Amphitrite develops kind of a nasty personality as a result of this. And I can't say I blame her terribly much. But by the same token, I hope you can understand that in a certain, admittedly warped to our 20th century sensibilities way, it is necessary for Poseidon to be a lusty, zesty, procreative type god. I pause for a question while I drink a cup of coffee or something in one fell gulp. Okay, I thought that was exceedingly well taught too. One little story about Galatea. Galatea was the sister of Amphitrite and Thetis, and the sister of 47 other Nereids. She was very, very beautiful. Her name in ancient Greek means milky. She had the milky skin that guys just love to touch. She drew the attentions, shall we say, of no less a person than a Cyclops. This Cyclops' name, and I'm going to erase this part because it's in the book, was named Polyphemus. It's not the same Polyphemus that we met at the beginning of class in the Cyclops' cave in the Odyssey. This is a different Cyclops named Polyphemus. For all I know, Polyphemus might have been as popular a name as Jennifer or Michael or Joe or something like that. There are all sorts of Polyphemuses in the Cyclops world. Well, Cyclopses are not very into hygiene. They're not really into manners or anything like that, but this Cyclops fell in love with Galatea. Only problem was she was this milky, beautiful sea nymph. And he's this big, ugly dork of a Cyclops. Yes?
Did sea nymphs have special characteristics about really long hair or something?
Oh yeah, hey, whatever you want, we'll make them special just for you, My personal sea nymph looks like a Southern Belle from Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. At any rate, the Cyclops figures he's going to try to impress this sea nymph named Galatea. So what he does is he cuts his hair with a scythe. And he gets one of these really cool haircuts that people have now, kind of short in the front and, kind of long in the sides. Or is that one out? Okay, good. I don't miss it. He trims his beard with a rake. Instead of this big, huge, bushy Cyclops beard, he gets a little goatee. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is he starts singing to her. He starts singing to her the worst song in the world. I'm kidding. I have this theory that the worst song in the world is... Pardon? That's pretty bad. Feelings. Nothing more than feelings. And here, one morning, this poor sea nymph, Galatea, we shouldn't hate her if she's beautiful, is sitting there minding her own business, and then she's being assailed by this Cyclops with a Billy Ray Cyrus haircut, a Van Dyke goatee, playing playing feelings on a harmonica or something like that. Of course, she wants no part of this. Meanwhile, there's this studly young shepherd walking by named Acus. Acus looks like the real deal. Okay, he's very studly, you know, and you women and Americans in the audience, you know, if we make custom sceniums for the guys, we'll make you some custom-made studly young shepherds. You know, looks like a combination of the best parts of Mel Gibson and Brad Pitt, and you name them, we'll make them. And certainly Galatea is impressed. Galatea starts, ooh, how cute! And pretty soon they're hugging and snuggling and groveling. I understand that's the new latest term for making out. I am young and vital. I keep up with these things, but Polyphemus sees this. And he gets so mad, he picks up this great big, he drops his lyre, picks up this rock, and throws it at the two. Well, he throws it at Acus. And he squishes Acus with the rock. The body rots away, but the gore, the dripping, oozing red junk that squirts out of his body when he gets flattened by the humongous rock, becomes the river Acus in ancient Greece. And that's why, Snake Hat, your name is Mike, right? Mike. That's why when your ancient Greek daughter asks you, Dad, why is the river Acus so red? You can tell her as much of this story as you dare to. It's an etiology, okay? And a pretty bad one at that. Being married to Poseidon is no picnic. He has a weird bunch of kids, which is strange for an anthropomorphic god. Imagine, if you will, Poseidon sitting at his desk at the bottom of the ocean, being a doting dad. He has pictures of his kids up on the wall in back of him. He doesn't have a picture of his wife Amphitrite because, frankly, he's not really a fanatic about being married. He has one legitimate son by his marriage to Amphitrite. This kid's name is Triton. Okay, Triton is usually the trumpeter of Poseidon. He's kind of a merman, and he travels around blowing a great big horn to announce his father's arrival. He's a very popular figure in fountains all around the world. Okay, if you've ever seen the Fountain of Trevi in beautiful downtown Rome, Italy, Triton is there, dude. Another child of Poseidon's, of whom he is very proud, is a wonderful horse by the name of Arion. One day, Poseidon got a case of the hots for his sister, the grain goddess Demeter. And he decided, in order to pursue her, he would change himself into a stallion. So Demeter's minding her own business. She sees a suspicious-looking stallion galloping up to her. Realizes, of course, it's her brother Poseidon. And what do you think she does to get away? She turns herself into a mare to get away. This is what I mean about being anthropomorphic to a fault. Okay, and eventually, shall we say discreetly, Poseidon catches her. And in due time, a wonderful child is born to her by the name of Arion, who, because his mom and dad were horses at the time that he was conceived, is himself a horse. Question? Et tu, Matt. I really don't know the answer to that. You're threatening me. And it's particularly galling because he's not on the class roster. I can't fix him at the end of the semester like I can fix you. Another daughter of Poseidon is the whirlpool Charybdis. A whirlpool who sucks all the water down in the Straits of Messina, but which separates Sicily and Italy, and then spits it back up. He's very proud of her. Think about it. You're sailing between the Straits of Messina. You're sailing through the Straits of Messina in the year of our Lord, 1452 BC. If you ever watched the tide roll in and out in a major way, watch the tide drop 6 feet in almost no time whatsoever, we explain that today by saying it's the moon. But back then, it's obviously a sea monster, right? And who's going to be the sea monster's dad? A sea god. And since by 1452 BC we're all pretty much into the anthropomorphic swing of things, it's not going to be Pontus, it's not going to be Oceanus, it's going to be Poseidon. Good question, well answered. Another famous child of Poseidon's is the winged horse Pegasus, who today works for TriStar Pictures and is also a spokeshorse for Mobil Gasoline. He is the child of Medusa and Poseidon. He comes into the world a very unusual way when Perseus decapitates, well actually it's more like a backhand, Medusa. Pegasus, the horse, pops out of the stump of her head, as does this guy by the name of Chrysaor, the man with the golden sword. Chrysaor isn't in any myths. His basic job in Greek mythology is to pop up out of Medusa's stumpy head after it's cut off, along with Pegasus the horse. This handsome guy here is the child of Poseidon and Gaia, Gaia is both his grandmother and his great-grandmother. They have a kid, a giant by the name of Antaeus, whose basic job is to be defeated in a wrestling match with Hercules in about 2 months. And finally, the other one, does anybody know who this is? Yes, it's a baby picture of his son Polyphemus, the famous Cyclops from the Odyssey. See if you can zoom in on him. That's the best baby Polyphemus I've ever drawn. He used to be a little boy. In our next exciting class, you've been a very good class, we'll touch a little bit more on the sea gods, and then we will start taking up a question which really does mean a lot to me. The ancient Greeks' approach to what happens to you after you die. All this and more in the next classical mythology. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to resume the discussion with a few more observations, a few more comments about sea gods and sea goddesses. As I think I've said before, they are not the most fascinating part of classical mythology once you get past their ability to breed in huge numbers and their appetite for destruction. But as the semesters have gone on, the semesters in which I've taught this class have gone on, I've grown to be a little bit more fond of the sea gods and goddesses for the opportunity they provide to study the transfer of attributes, to study the transition from animism to anthropomorphism in ancient Greek religious thought. If you'll recall from our previous discussion, the god Pontus is the son of the goddess Gaia. She brought him forth herself. And he literally is the great, big, huge expanse of purplish blue water that surrounds the earth. The god Oceanus, the Titan Oceanus, who is the son of Gaia and Uranus, is pretty much the same thing. That is to say, he is the big blue, purplish blue expanse of water surrounding the earth also. We don't see a tremendous progression As a matter of fact, the ancient Greeks could very well have regarded these two gods as one and the same. Much as the ancient Greeks, we have it on Homer's authority, that the ancient Greeks regarded Helios and the Titan Hyperion as one and the same god. What's characteristic of these two gods, again to recap, is that they are literally deified parts of the physical world. Not so the god Poseidon. The god Poseidon is the son of Cronus and Rhea. As such, he is completely anthropomorphic. When he's born, he looks like every other little human baby in the world. He is devoured by his father, vomited back up. We know that drill. And he grows up to be a god with human figures, a big, bushy, white flowing beard and white flowing hair, anthropomorphic, like his brother Zeus, to a fault. Right down to the rotten temper, the cheating on his wife, and the ability to hold grudges. Again, going back to Pontus and concluding with Poseidon, we see a very excellent, and that's a hint, example of the transition from animism to anthropomorphism in Greek religious thought. Let's think for a second about the descendants, the progeny, if you will, of Pontus, Poseidon, and Oceanus. Pontus and Oceanus tend to have children in droves, Oceanids, Nereids, the hundreds of thousands of little spirits that possess this or that body of water. As I believe I've said in a previous discussion, you contemplate the way that any individual body of water behaves, and it's not terribly hard to conclude that it's got a mind of its own. It behaves the way it does because there's a mind or a will animating it. And it takes a lot of such deities to populate an animistic world. Poseidon's children are a little bit different. If you'll recall, he has one son, Triton, who is a merman. That is to say, he's half fish, half human. He splashes about through the water, blowing on a conch shell to announce that his dad, Poseidon, is coming. Another child of Poseidon is the horse Pegasus, who is his child by Medusa. Another child of Poseidon is the influential whirlpool Charybdis. You'll notice that these are not group deities. You'll notice that these children are not born in multiples of 5 or 50 or 500,000 or what have you. These are each individual children. This in and of itself represents the anthropomorphic nature of Poseidon. It so happens that Triton is his only legitimate son. By his sister Demeter, he has a son who is also the wonderful horse Arion, and so on and so forth. Unlike Zeus, who tends to beget children who are fully anthropomorphic, completely human-looking gods and goddesses, or men or women, depending on who he breeds them with, the children of Poseidon tend to be very strange-looking. They tend to be whirlpools or monsters or a little bit of each. This, I believe, represents Poseidon's nature as the sea god. Even though he is fully anthropomorphic, people then as now believe in sea monsters. People then and now believe in these indescribably weird creatures that populate the bottom of the ocean. And Poseidon, despite the fact that he's anthropomorphic, despite the fact that he looks and behaves like an ancient Greek male, only worse, has to be in charge of these gods or goddesses too. And therefore you get the weird progeny, the horses and the sea monsters and the merman and the stray human-looking person. Poseidon was one of the more popular of the ancient Greek gods. That is to say that his myths were particularly compelling. The contest with his niece Athena for the control of Athens is one such example. We get to see Poseidon feeling jealous because his niece Athena outdueled him to see who'd be the patron of the city of Athens. He gets even by smiting the ground with his trident and causing a tidal wave, which gets back to, which will lead to the next topic. What are the advantages and disadvantages of belief in anthropomorphic gods and goddesses? Again, the god Poseidon, examining the career of the god Poseidon, will give us a good opportunity to recap the strengths and the weaknesses of the anthropomorphic belief system. On the positive side, and I know I've beaten this into the ground time and time again, but it's worth it one more time. The ancient Greeks gravitated from an animistic belief system to an anthropomorphic belief system in an attempt to gain some control over the forces that surrounded them, the forces at work in their universe. Whether they were physical features of the universe like Poseidon or abstract concepts like justice. There is no point in praying to the deified body of water that is beating up against the shore. It has no human characteristics. It can't hear you. It can't be persuaded by you. It can't be reasoned with in the way that Poseidon can. The Greek god Poseidon is a very temper-prone god, for lack of a better word. He has a bad temper. He has a big ego. He has a raging libido, so on, so forth. And he can be placated that way. He can be reasoned with that way. You can pray to Poseidon and offer him gifts and hope that he can be persuaded in a way that Pontus or Oceanus could not. Another advantage of belief in anthropomorphic gods and goddesses is that they are more easily understood. When trying to understand the workings of any body of water, when trying to understand the workings of really any force at work in the natural world, the animistic way of dealing with it is controlled by a god or goddess that we can't understand is a necessary first step. Yes, I know why the river grew outside of its banks and flooded the nearby areas and carried away the farmland and the soil and the houses and the crops. I know why that happened. It was an angry deity. And in the absence of any better understanding of fluid dynamics, in the absence of any better understanding of meteorology, that's good enough. But again, as you try to comprehend why the god was angry, why the god carried away crops and animals and houses and whatnot, then the next step is to try to control it, to try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Building dikes, living on higher land are part of the solution. But the ancient Greeks, much like every other primitive society in the world, also felt the need to make advances in their conceptions of God, their conceptions of the powers that worked around them. By the time that the ancient Greeks had learned how to write down their myths again, if you'll recall, this is around 750, 700 BC. The ancient Greeks still had not they had not really made their first halting steps towards what we would now call the scientific explanation of why the world works. Gods such as Poseidon, myths of Poseidon, are a necessary transitional step. We have floods, we have tidal waves because Poseidon is angry. And if we can pray to Poseidon, if we can try to understand Poseidon, this will help stop the tidal waves. This will help stop the overflowing rivers and whatnot. A third advantage of anthropomorphic concepts of worship is that the stories are just much more interesting. If you have ever taken physical geography, if you have ever taken geology, you have probably encountered the temptation to answer an essay question, answer a problem with why, and you answer it because Poseidon says there have to be tidal waves, because the river god says that there must be floods. We have thunderstorms because Zeus is angry. Wouldn't it be great to be able to put that down on a test and get full credit? There came a day when the ancient Greeks wouldn't accept that for an answer either, but until that time, the stories about Poseidon getting angry and flooding the city of Athens, the story of Poseidon getting angry at an individual sailor or whatnot and leading him astray or drowning him or whatnot, these are all more interesting than the sort of stuff you're going to get in today's physical geography classes and geology classes and whatnot. The ancient Greeks found these more interesting, and let's be honest about it, I forgot most of what I know about meteorology or knew about meteorology or astronomy the instant I walked out of the classroom. There's no real way you can present it in an interesting fashion to people who are not already interested in it. But people do tend to remember the stories of the ancient Greek gods and goddesses. So the positives of the anthropomorphic conception of deity in ancient Greece are the anthropomorphic gods are more receptive, more empathetic, or can be interpreted as more empathetic than can their animistic counterparts. To the extent that you can understand Poseidon, that you can understand Zeus, that you can understand, God help us, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love, the world about you is more easily understood, and the stories are more interesting. The downside of anthropomorphic conceptions of worship: the anthropomorphic gods and goddesses can become too human. To rehash the obvious, there was a time when it made all the sense in the world, when it was an advance, when it was a major improvement for ancient Greek society to think of the sea as ruled by an anthropomorphic god named Poseidon. It made all the sense in the world that his children should include various sea monsters, wonder horses, mermen, and whatnot. But as the ancient Greeks struggled, and here we're talking about the 7th and 6th and 5th centuries BC with the beginnings of science, the work of the philosopher Thales of Miletus, who came up with this novel notion that all matter was composed of water. Not everybody believed him. Not everybody even knew that he was talking about this sort of stuff. But as knowledge like this, attempts at comprehending the universe in scientific terms, became more popular, more elaborate in ancient Greece, it gets harder and harder to think of that great big blue expanse of water as being controlled by this irascible guy, this irascible god, let's say, with a big flowing white beard and whatnot. The stories about Poseidon chasing his sister Demeter around. He chased her in the form of a horse, so she turned herself naturally into a filly to try and get away with him. Becomes sillier and sillier to the extent that society's knowledge of the universe becomes more detailed, more believable, and let's say more accurate. The stories remain interesting. That is to say, the story of Demeter and Poseidon, the story of Poseidon and Athena deciding who got to be the patron of Athens, are still popular, but they are no longer popular as an explanation of what happened. They are no longer important as an honest attempt to comprehend the nature of the universe. They become entertainment. And that's not bad. It's thanks to their entertainment value, I'm convinced, that most of these myths survive at all. But the gods and goddesses, the anthropomorphic gods and goddesses, become literally too human to compel any belief. They get to the point, to bring up the question again, when did the Greeks stop believing these myths? It's hard to say. I want to close this little additional discussion with the example of a fellow, maybe you've been in this position, who has been trapped at sea, who is caught in a storm, and he prays to Poseidon to be delivered. Probably not a predicament that most people watching this can identify with, but by transference, you can say, imagine yourself out on the freeway with 15 miles to the next services and your fuel gauge is scraping bottom. Or you are driving through this actually happened to me, driving through a hailstorm in the middle of nowhere in your brand new car. You'd like to stay on the road and you'd like your car to stay in one piece. I am convinced that even though the Greeks pretty well knew by the year of our Lord 600 BC that the ocean was not, the wiser of the Greeks knew by the year 600 BC that the waters of the ocean were not guided by a god named Poseidon. By the 5th century BC, by 500 BC, the ancient Greeks believed that water was made out of little bitty particles of water that hung together to form oceans or rivers or streams or whatnot, the atomic theory of Democritus. I'm still convinced that if you were ever caught, an ancient Greek, no matter how skeptical he or she may have been, were caught out on the open sea in a storm and prayed to Poseidon to say, Poseidon, get me out of this. Well, number one, I'm sure that 99 out of 100 times a person would drown. But that one person who made it out of the storm safely and unexpectedly, after praying to Poseidon, was going to come back, set foot on shore, a believer in Poseidon. We can't discount the importance of experiences like this, because as silly as it may seem, even though the ancient Greeks knew better, as I've just mentioned, by 500 BC, you could still find people, heck, you can find them today, who are willing to believe in sea gods who control the waters of the ocean. Thank you.